Come on. We are live. Steve Westman, Audiophile Roundtable, the Friday, the Big Show edition. I've got Mazzy with me. I've got Better Records, Tom Port. Hello, Mr. Port. How are you?
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for coming on today.
I'm happy to be here.
I've got Nathan Goss. No introduction needed. We know Nathan. We've got Patrick pbthal. How you doing, Patrick?
I'm doing well. It's Happy Friday.
And then below me, I said that last time, it was a T-rated program, is Geoff Edgers, the Washington Post. Thank you for joining us today, Geoff. How are you?
Good. I'm doing well. Thanks.
Well, I wanted to start. This is a fun one because we're going to, we have Tom on today to talk also too. And I have an assignment. I had an assignment for Tom that was to find, I wanted the audience to really see what Tom's 5 best-selling records are. I mean, he's got a lot to talk about today, and I think you did your assignment and then plus that, didn't you, Tom? It was a big assignment I gave you.
Yeah, it took me all of about 3 minutes to write down my 5 records, but yeah, I worked hard on it.
Well, that's good.
But actually, the thing that and we can either go there or we could go to the thing that I had planned on doing for years. A lot of the stuff in my blog, I have an idea for some posting that I want to do, and I write down some aspects of what it will entail, and then it goes into a drafts folder. And this one is from maybe 2 years ago, and there's about another 600 just like it. And they just nothing ever happens to them. And they're sort of like jokes that they're not that funny, but someday maybe you could figure out how to make them funny, and you just write them down on a scrap of paper and leave them in a drawer. That's the kind of thing. But one of these days I'm going to do it. So that's my extra above and beyond part of the
Wow. Okay. Well, I want to start off. I know, Geoff, you've been busy, and I know last week you sent me this article, and we know now there was never a band like Rush. Getty Lee doesn't want to forget it. So you got to write that article. Can you tell the folks about that experience, writing about Getty Lee and obviously meeting Getty Lee? Did you do that in Toronto or in New York? Where did you guys hook up?
I did that in Toronto, where he lives, and so I would like to say that Getty Lee probably is someone I've been wanting to write about for years and years. I remember watching the documentary on Rush, Beyond the Lighted Stage, and what was fascinating to me is I hadn't really thought much about like them as people, and I was really intrigued by their stories, and also like Getty's story was fascinating to me. His parents were in Auschwitz and escaped. Were married after the war at Bergen-Belsen, another concentration camp. I just never thought of Getty Lee as Jewish. I don't know what it was. And came to Toronto, and he, his rock life is fascinating, obviously, but like his pre-rock life is, to me, very intriguing. So I've been begging to write that story. He has a memoir that just came out, which is excellent. And so I just begged and begged and begged. He doesn't really do the kind of story I do normally. He does a lot of like Q&As or like short stories or quick. Rush was always hated by the press, and so their general approach was to ignore them. It wasn't until later on when they started getting, like on the Colbert Show, and people were like, "Oh, Rush is pretty good, actually." I always loved Rush. When I was 11 years old, I ate maybe 500 bags of Pop Rocks and watched Tom Sawyer, that video. I couldn't understand it's like these guys, they were in this room and there was snow outside, and like the guy was on the keyboard at times, then he would be over on the other area. They were sitting together. Neil Peart was just the way he did the drums, just everything. So I always loved Rush. So I spent basically 2.5 days with him. And Alex, I said, "Could I talk to Alex?" And he's like, "Well, I'm going to dinner with him and a couple guys to try wines." And I was like, "Well, can I go?" And normally in a publicity situation like that, there's a person in the middle of that, and they're like, "That wasn't arranged." I just showed up, and Alex was one of the funniest, nicest people I've ever met. And he really loves music and wanted me to hear his new band, which is called Envy of None. So he said, "What are you doing tomorrow?" I said, "Well, I'm going to come back to Getty's house, but also I'm going to go to a diner and get some breakfast." And I showed up at the diner, and it was a tap on my shoulder. I turned around, and it was Alex with his record, and he wanted to give it to me. And so I ended up, getting to know him too. So that was, but our story, I think, gets into everything. When you're seeing these thousands of repurposed, hacky clickbait stories that are like, Getty Lee says Rush could play again. That's from our story. I mean, that's like the last 3 paragraphs of my story. And I really just feel lucky to be having been able to do that.
Well, Alex is great. I don't know if you guys, I'm representing Canada today with the Tragical Hip, obviously Rush being from Canada. Alex actually had his claim to fame, other than being Rush. He was one of the actors, or he played himself in the TV show Trailer Park Boys, a couple of episodes. If you guys have ever seen that, where the three Trailer Park main characters actually kidnapped him from a Rush concert. And it's hilarious, absolutely hilarious. I don't know what season it is; you'd have to Google it. But I definitely, if you're a Rush fan, you haven't seen the
Canadian
Trailer Park.
only shows. This one,
It was filmed in Halifax in the early 2000s to mid to late 2000s. The Trailer Park Boys. I want to say latter seasons he came out. It was pretty awesome. So yeah, you have to check that out. But yeah, Getty, I mean, me growing up, I think, Geoff, you and I are close to the same age. So yeah, watching Tom Sawyer, and it'd be Much Music here in Canada. I mean, it was weird. I mean, it definitely was different. I think that was 83 maybe?
81.
81. Wow. There you go. Yeah. Yeah. Did you, so Nathan, are you a big Rush guy at all? I never did ask you. We've never had that conversation.
Yes and no. I mean, I am not like, I have to have every single record from start to finish, but I mean, the ones that I do like, I enjoy, but I'm not going to say that, I follow them to the point where I could tell you every single song or every lyric to every track or something like that.
And I know you were mentioning that Getty's going to be doing a tour of his his book. It's called My Effing Life. I think that's the name of it, isn't it?
Yeah,
I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So he's touring.
Tonight he's in DC, and tomorrow he's in Boston. He already did New York. I think he did.
Well, there he is. There he's coming. He's coming November. What does that say? November 23rd to my city, Vancouver. There you go.
Mm-hmm.
It's just right over here is where he's going to be. That's
Seattle next week. Okay,
so. Am I going to go? Probably not, but I mean, And then you were saying, like, you get his book with that ticket as well. You get to listen.
It's a good show. I don't know how this is built to impact bestseller lists, but when Bono did his book release, he also did a tour, and same venue in Boston. And you walk in, and as part of your ticket, you get a hardcover book, which is $40. And you also get a very nice program from Getty's that has all sorts of fresh material in there that he wrote up, and pictures and things. And there's merch from the tour and Getty himself. I didn't see any Rush merch. So that's, I guess, how they're doing it. And I saw it at the Beacon Theater in New York, and it was packed. People were psyched to be there.
Is the book his base book, or is it a different book? Is it his big coffee table base book?
He did his big, beautiful book of bass a few years ago. This is a proper memoir. This covers, like, if you want to know about like Rush and the creation of Rush and the creation of those records, it goes into like real detail. Like Steve Lillywhite abandons us to do the Simple Minds record. Like there are only two people he complains about: Steve Lillywhite and Bill Graham. That's it. He's the nicest man of all time.
Well, Geoff, he's Canadian, of course.
Everybody complained about Bill Graham, except when you went to a show at Bill Graham's. It was on time. It was great. And growing up in San Francisco, he was like, we idolized him, even though we knew he was an asshole.
So
also, parents from Auschwitz. You were talking about Getty's parents being in concentration camps, or escaping the concentration camps.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, you just can't imagine how that frames someone's life growing up. Because there are two, from what I understand, there are two kinds of survivors. One is the kind who never talks about it, and then the one who always talks about it. And that was Getty's mother. So he just grew up knowing everything you could about what she'd gone through.
That's amazing. So today's topic was the quest for, I guess, best sounding records. That's why I wanted to bring Tom Port on, because if anyone doesn't know, betterrecords.com, I believe, is your website, Tom, where your website finds the best sounding records out there, or the best sounding titles out there. Is that the business model? You can tell us more about that.
Well, we try. Some people don't agree with us, but most of our customers do. So that's all that really matters. It's Better Dash Records. We got to put a dash in there. But if you do any search for Better Records or Tom Horton, Hot Stampers or any of that stuff, and Geoff has been to our studio and he's heard some Hot Stampers. So He
I
knows.
I've purchased a few.
And I will say, Patrick and I we're big proponents of like the blind shootouts. Is that what you guys do? Is the completely blind shootouts when you're testing 6-7 different records of the same cut, or how do you do it?
Well, Geoff actually got to witness one. We weren't able to use it in the video, and I talk about it all the time. It's such a sad situation that we weren't able to use the video of it. But there was a Dire Straits first album, and there were 5 identical looking copies, and I sat in the chair, and they put them on one at a time, and I critiqued them and said which one was the best and which one was the worst and where they all went along the spectrum. And the best part of that whole thing, which I've never actually written about, it's another one of those drafts, commentaries, and I haven't written about it, but we put on the mobile fidelity, and I guess Geoff wants to be friends with everybody. He probably shouldn't talk about it, but I sure thought it was one of the worst sounding records I have ever heard in my life. It was just so wrong on so many levels. And there's no deep bass. All the deep bass just disappeared, and there was really blobby mid bass. But the best part about it was the young lady who was dropping the needle on each of the records. While my back was turned or somebody was confusing me, which is not hard to do, she switched the turntable to 45, and she put on the mobile fidelity, which is a 2 LP 45 set. And so I had no idea what was going on, but it was just crazy bad. And it was one of those situations where I was glad that Geoff could be there to hear it for himself, which is the reason why we get on our soapbox and we rail against these records. They're just terrible. And that is the perfect example, but we weren't able to use it. So all I have
we used Carole King. We used Carole King.
Was the analog production 45 there as well? Was that part of the mix?
What was it again?
Was the analog production one of them?
No, we didn't have the analog productions. We did the Tapestry with the mobile fidelity, and there was an analog productions version of a jazz record.
Kenny Dorham.
That Kenny Dorham.
Yeah.
And Quiet Kenny, right?
Yeah.
And there was Electric Recording Company?
Electric Recording Company as well, yeah.
And that was just amazingly bad.
I think you gave the analog productions, you said
it was okay.
It was not terrible.
Right.
Which was, right. Something, the thing about, and I just want to like boil this down in a quick, if I could, about
go for it.
Because I think it's interesting because we all talk about shootouts, and I'll just give you an example of what I do and why it's and how it's generally deficient compared to what Tom does, but it's also because of my economic standing in the world, which is I don't have a business that allows me to do it. So like, for example, I got the Meat Puppets. One of my favorite records is Up on the Sun, right? Love that record. So the Meat Puppets, so they put it, they reissued it, right? So I get the reissue right there. So I also had a previous copy of this record from 2010 put out by MVD. So I listened to them both and I go, these sound very different, but neither of them sound great, but they just sound different. So I wrote the drummer, who's actually very accessible. He's a great curator of their stuff. And he goes, we don't have the tapes. I think he said the 2011 was made off a CD. He said, and then we were able to pull it off a CD. SST Records, which is notoriously the punk rock record label in the 80s, just won't give people tapes. So, he said, we did the best we could. The new one sounds better because we have better equipment. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. So then as far as I can go without bankrupting everyone, as I go out and I found this is about 110. It was the original pressing and I listened to that. Okay. So that's what I do. And that's already more effort, I think, than most humans, but maybe not as much effort as you guys, because I know you guys do that sort of thing as well. What Tom will do is he's already decided, and his guys have already decided, you know what? That MVD one stinks. Why would he even bother with it? We know that the pool of records is going to be, I don't know what Tom's hot stamper is for that record, or if he even has one, but he might say, I know the hot stamper is going to be from 1987 and from the United States, and it's going to have roughly these things on it. And then they'll get like 10 of those or 15 of those. and listen to them at the same time. Now, who the hell has the time to do that? I do my best. There's a local record store here that I love in Littleton, Massachusetts, and I go in there, and the guy thinks I'm a little crazy, but when I want a record, like I wanted Scarecrow the other day, and I go in there, and that's the kind of record they have, like 5,000 of them. So I'll say, hey, Brad, I'm just gonna pay for one. I'm gonna take like these 8 home. Is that okay? But I'll bring back 7. And he's like, sure. And that's what I do. That's the best I can do, and under a rare circumstance. But you can't do that. I can't do that with like Sgt. Pepper or like, Led Zeppelin 2.
But you can increase your odds if you know what to look for. If you know what mastering engineers, what etchings to look for, what pressing plants, all that kind of stuff. You can actually make yourself have a better shot at getting a better sounding record if you know some things. So
well, you can get into the pool. Yeah. Like the pool is probably always going to be better than the crappy version of the record, right? So you're going to get in the pool. But
in the pool, though, you can have one that was pressed at Terre Haute. You could have one that was pressed at Gloverville. You could have one that was pressed at Columbia Santa Maria. One that was pressed as Monarch. One that was pressed there's all sorts of different ways. One that was mastered by George Marino. One that was later mastered by Ted Jensen. You have all sorts of variables to that pool. It's not just the pool. It's inside the pool. There are variables as well. Not irregardless of like, there's so many different variables on each one.
So Tom, I'll ask Tom.
Your pool is smaller, Tom, than that pool. Don't we agree?
And that's what I wanted to ask Tom. So how do you come up with that pool? Is it by the matrix, by the master engineer? How does it work?
I think it's very important to stipulate that you can't know what should be in the pool ahead of time, except that you can say it's unlikely that a 2008 reissue of a classic rock record from 1973 is going to be very good. We've never heard one that was, and maybe there's a possibility of it, but let's just rule that one out. But here's how we would narrow the pool. Let's say you know something about, let's say Black Sabbath's first album, and you've already heard some British on NEMS, and they never sounded any good. That doesn't mean there isn't one that is good, but who has the money to pursue it? And then you've played some original American pressings on the green label, and some of those are really good and some of those aren't very good. And so you kind of go with the ones that whatever pressing plant and whoever made it tended to do a better job, and you get 5 or 6 or 8 of those. I probably can't get 8 Black Sabbath first albums, but it took us probably 10 years of research before we did our first shootout for Black Sabbath, because we would buy something and it just wouldn't cut it. And then we would buy something else and it was like, okay, that's pretty good, but it'll take us another 5 years to find enough of those. And so things just sort of, they just get put on the back burner. But the idea, I talk about this a lot. There was a record nobody cares about called Ambrosia's third album, Life Beyond LA. And I had a copy. There's LW, WW, and JW, Jacksonville, Los Angeles, Winchester, something, whatever those are. And those are the main stampers that you find for the American pressings. And I wouldn't even bother with a Japanese pressing. I wouldn't buy an import. That just has never worked out. Maybe 1 out of 100 are any good. And I'm not going to go with those odds. I'm going to just say those odds are just too weird. Although with Led Zeppelin, as Geoff can tell you, there are some countries that produce them, and there are some eras that produce them that you would never expect to be good, and they're amazing sounding. But that's just because we've been playing every copy of Led Zeppelin we can get our hands on.
Mazzy had a question.
So the bottom line is, for all of us who've been collecting records, or even for 50 years, or even people who for 5 years, it's luck. It's just luck if we have a good copy of whatever record we have a good copy of.
There's a lot of luck involved. In fact,
I might have that great copy that you may call a hot stamper, and 100 others that you may not call 100. Well, but also it's subjective, maybe too, don't you think? No.
Well, 2 points. One, we are very particular about the term hot stamper, and it only involves a record that's been through a shootout. So if somebody has a good sounding record, I love my copy of Black Sabbath's first album, it must be a hot stamper. It may be a hot stamper, but when it goes through a shootout, that's when it is or isn't. And so, because it's everything, it's relative to other copies. It's not There's an awful lot of good sounding copies of Dark Side of the Moon, but that doesn't make them hot stampers. That just makes them good.
So Tom, I had the Rhinos Patrick Milligan on. It looks as though he's trying to get, I guess, the Black Sabbath self-titled recut by Kevin Gray in the new year. I mean, obviously he didn't tell us. I mean, I'm assuming that's something he's going to try to go for. Right. Now, what do you think of the Vertigo cut relative to the U.S. press? And I mean, which one in your shootout sounds better? Because a lot of people talk about the Vertigo cut being the cut to own, and I have both, just so you know.
Well, we were never impressed with any of the Vertigo stuff for Black Sabbath, and we bought them and thrown our money away and sold them on eBay because they just don't sound very good. They sound very dubby to us, and that's a perfect example of a rule of thumb that audiophiles have, which is the band is British, and therefore the label, the British version, should be the best version. But that just doesn't turn out to be true often enough. It might be true most of the time, but most of the time is really not very good. If you want to have a great sounding record collection, you got to go with what actually is the truth rather than what tends to be the truth. And so when we first heard our first amazing green label Warner Brothers Black Sabbath, and I have a big stereo and I play it really loud, and I heard that rainstorm. Yeah, I was just blown away, and I said, this is the way to go. There's no NEMs, there's no Vertigos, there's nothing that sounds like that we've played. That doesn't mean there isn't such a thing. And if somebody wants, but the other thing is our stereo is all set up to pull out all the shortcomings and all the weaknesses of the record. And not very many people have stereos like that, because those stereos are just terrible for the average record collector, because the average record is very average. And so if you really want something that'll show you how average your records are, you could have a stereo like mine, but it wouldn't be very pleasant. You really have to go through a lot of trouble to find records that sound the way you want them to sound on a
So Nathan, Nathan does a lot of reviews in the different Facebook forums and whatnot. So do you do a lot of the blind shootouts? What are you doing in terms of your shootouts? Do you compare them to the originals, and what do you find in comparing to the reissues that are out there, the new audiophile reissues versus some of the OGs that are out there right now? Same as Tom, or what are your thoughts on things?
So I would say it's all over the place, number one, in terms of like, the reissue piece of it. Just to backtrack for just a second. So we often use things like, this is the best version, or this version is better than this, that, and the other thing. And I agree, like there's obviously some subjectivity to it, but it's also like driving a car, right? There's a lot of different styles of driver out there, but there's definitely a right and wrong way in some instances of driving a car, right? There's certain things that you can and can't do in a car if you're driving it the way that it's meant to be driven. So I feel like it's the same with like a lot of the sound quality on the records. Is we all may have our certain preferences with certain things. Some may like more bass, some may like more definition, some may like a more neutral, flatter sound, whatever the case may be. But I do think there are examples of like really bad pressings that nobody should find appealing. And yet, even though we may say that, there are still people that will find even the most abysmal versions that they'll say, I didn't see or I didn't hear anything wrong with that. So are they just crazy, or do they just not have equipment that's allowing them to actually hear any differences? What I found to be true is that the better your equipment gets, the more gap there tends to be between, good, better, and best, right? Usually weaker equipment is not going to be able to see the glaring differences between, all the different various quality levels. The other thing that I wanted to point out though too, and this is something that I'm kind of coming up against recently, is I noticed that there's a lot of variance between people's opinions with people that have bookshelf speakers and floor standing speakers. And a lot of it has to do with what you're using for your crossovers and how much bass is being, integrated in your system, whether you're isolating that, whether you're using any type of subwoofers. Like that tends to be a large part of like people's preference whenever they, do a setup. Because I can tell you, when you listen to monitor speakers, you tend to get more of the high-end clarity that people associate with being clearer or better, but you're also missing out maybe a lot of the mid-range or a lot of the low end that's kind of swooped out of that. And so your ears are perceiving that as being a better quality. And that doesn't necessarily mean that that's always the case. So I don't know where I was going with that, but that's just something that I was thinking
I
about.
think what you're going is it's equipment based. It's like someone that has an MM cartridge all of a sudden goes and gets the MC cartridge. That's like
Whoa,
you know,
whoa, 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 whoa,
Uh-oh,
whoa, whoa. Now you stepped into it. So
okay.
Gloves are
what
off
is that?
now.
Why would you think that a moving coil is better than a moving magnet? Just because it costs more? Because I've had
He didn't say it was
$5,000
better. He
moving
said it was
coils.
different. He didn't say it was
I mean, you can't
said
sit there
different.
and say, I have had $5,000 carts on
I know
my
you have.
system. I've had all sorts of stuff on there, and it's not the
How
moving
about
coil
that? My
versus moving magnet.
personal journey is when I'm shifted from MM to MC. In my journey, I definitely heard a difference in it. Sound.
I went from MC
Not-
to MM.
Yeah.
So
there you go.
So and it shouldn't take. And one of my biggest thing is it shouldn't take a $20,000 stereo to make a record sound good. If a record's going to sound good, it should be able to sound good on just about anything, as long as the system has good synergy. So I mean, that's just my opinion. Is that you shouldn't take a $50,000 system with massive Wilson speakers on it, to make something sound decent. If you have a good, like Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon is a great sounding recording. Tom mentioned Ambrosia. Ambrosia's first album is one of the best sounding records I've ever heard in my life. And it's like a $2 record. And that is just phenomenal. That thing pops. I mean, I think Alan Zentz mastered that, and it was cut by Alan Parsons engineered it. And that's just an amazing sounding record.
Alan Parsons mixed it. It was engineered by somebody else. And then he actually engineered their second album, which I've been listening to a lot lately. But I'm glad there's one other person in the world that likes the Ambrosia first album.
I love that record.
It's my favorite album of all time.
Yeah. Well, the thing when you talk about equipment, and I never tell Tom the size of my speakers. I'll just tell you that right now.
Which was a very wise choice and decision you made.
But I have a nice fella in the Boston area, Jim Fuller. His job.
Are they dainty? Are they dainty?
Here's the thing. I want music to be part of my family's life. And I want my kids to be able to come down and throw a record on. I want to be cooking in the kitchen and have the record playing. I want my wife to be able to throw on the DAC and go on and listen to her radio station that she likes on there. It's just what I want. I got something. I could do something. If I were like Tom Cruise, I could put something in the basement. But, Tom's listening room, the listening room at Better Records it's almost uninhabitable. It's for crazy people. It's got all sorts of stuff hanging on the walls. It's got wires hanging down.
I've seen those wires. It's a
too crazy much. World. I would never want to. I could never live in there, but I'd like to visit. So, the thing about it is Jim Fuller, this great guy in Boston who sets up cartridges and knows a lot about equipment. He came over my house when I was doing my story a long time ago on it, and he helped me set up some things. And he said to me, and I really appreciate this, because a lot of people will scold me for my setup, and he said, "You know what? Sounds really good. Like
synergy.
It's never going to sound a certain way because of your room. There's nothing you can do about that, but it sounds as good as this room can sound, and you should be happy with it." And I was like, thank you, as opposed to like, get rid of these bookcases, close the windows, put up this trellis over the kitchen sink.
Get rid of the TV in between your speakers.
Unplug the at all times. So it's like, but the reality is, I know that I'm getting limited performance out of that system, but it's good for me right now.
But you like it. You love it, right? You like it.
Oh, I love that. I love that system. But
isn't that the ultimate? That's what matters. I mean,
it's like I love a nice car.
Ago,
I just can't
right
really
when the pandemic started, I switched to an MC card. I got a Hanna ML, which is what, a $1,200 card or something, and from having an MM. I'm a Riga guy, and it was a world of difference for me. A world of difference. Now, you
also went to a microline. You went to a microline stylus as opposed to an elliptical stylus. That was the big difference.
Okay, well, whatever the difference was, I'm probably like Geoff. I don't know this shit that you guys are talking about, but I loved it. And people kind of mock me because I always say I get very few bad records. I get very few with noise, with distortion, with this, and they go, "How come you get all the lucky? You don't get Warped Records, Mazzy. You don't get this." And I only attribute to that card, that MC card, is very forgiving. Maybe I don't know if that's true or not, but
it is.
I get very few bad records, even with all the bullshit about everyone complaining about bad pressing plants and stuff today. I think in the last 3 years, I've gotten out of the hundreds or thousands of records I've gotten, maybe 4 went back.
Well, you, Tom, myself, I don't know who, but I know that Tom has the 17D3. I think it's the Dynavector.
It's a DX now, but
Yeah.
I'm glad you
That's the
brought
micro
up that.
ridge micro line. That's the
Right.
micro ridge micro line.
I'm glad you brought that issue up because I've been through it, and anybody who's been in audio as long as I have has to have been through it, where you have cartridges that are noisier than other cartridges, and you play the same record, and now it's quieter or it's noisy, and that's because your cartridge is just noisier or quieter. So my 17DX really gets down deep into the groove, and it seems to be quieter than most cartridges out there. But I had a Benz, I had a $3,000 Benz, and as soon as I got rid of it, every record in my collection got quieter. And I was very happy that that happened. It also sounded better, so I was pretty pleased about that. But we do get customers who return records, and whenever a customer returns a record, we get the record back, we play it, we try to find the fault that they found with it, and 9 times out of 10, it plays just fine. 1 times out of 10, maybe there's a mark we missed or something. And I just think it's foolish for audiophiles who love vintage records to buy cartridges that are not designed to be quiet, because most vintage records have a lot of noise issues of one kind or another. And if you want to enjoy them, you should choose the equipment that can let you do that.
The Microline Micro-Lich cartridge is the most advanced, best tracking stylus profile there is. There's really no debate about it. There's really none. Even Peter Litterman at Soundsmith will agree and say, hey, he didn't even make a Microline Micro-Ridge, but even he will say it's the best. It's the best tracking stylus profile. It may be the best sounding to people, but it is the best tracking.
Did Tom and Geoff order today their Rhino audiophile records yet? That
I did not.
Don't even make me go off on that.
I have some of those. I said,
I tell you,
you're not happy with it, Nathan?
These are old things. No, my point is, I think this is a mistake to do this, but this is a fantastic record. Herbie Hancock. I don't know if you need
the Captain Me's a great record too. It's just there's lots of them out there that you don't need.
But there's not a lot of these out there in comparison.
Yeah.
So
well, I will. If I could just jump in for 1 second and say there's not a lot of good Captain and Me's out there, because the green label versions are substantially better than the reissues on the Palm Tree label, and they're very hard to find and expensive when you do, because they didn't make very many of those because the band got famous
over time. 73, yeah.
And so when you get a good green label copy of that record, which happened to us maybe 15 years ago, we were like, wow, what a great recording. Who knew? Because it's the same with the Eagles' first album, which is one of the records I'm going to talk about at some point in this video, possibly. And if you have the sort of light blue label versions of it, which are all reissues, and then one day you find the original white Asylum label, and it's just a completely different record. And so whatever opinion you may have of the album was probably not accurate because you didn't have a good copy of the record to judge it with.
Here's that white Asylum label he's talking about, but I'm talking about this album. The only thing I'm going to say is, if you don't like the Eagles, and if you want basically an Eagles record but with a little more soul, and I want to get quoted in the Washington Post someday that Jackson Browne is basically the Eagles with soul. That's so because he's got the angst, the shit.
He didn't have the harmonies though. They don't have the harmonies at the Eagles.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. He's got the soul. He's got not the perfect voice.
The best song on that record is Jamaica Say You Will.
Eagles, buy an early Asylum Jackson Browne record.
Hey Steve.
Yes.
So I want to go back to answering your question a little bit better, though. Yeah. So you're talking about my process, right? So I'm actually going to use the example from, Geoff was kind enough to send me his.
I was trying to get to that, so perfect.
Yeah. So I got this, I don't know, a couple months ago.
Let me put it up. Let me put you a full screen. Hold on.
Okay. This is the Thelonious Monk, Brilliant Corners. This is the Craft, one step, right?
That's a Bernie Grenman remaster.
Yeah. So the only other version of this that I ever heard was a CD that was not very good. So when I got this, I listened to it, and to answer your question, the first thing I do is I just listen to it on its own merits. So before I start thinking in terms of comparison, all I'm listening for is it moving me? Is it touching me? Is it something that's appealing? Are all the pieces there? Am I hearing things right? So I think that's kind of where I always start off. So prior to having anything to compare this really to, I was fairly happy with it. When Geoff sent me his copy, which I'll let him kind of explain that whole situation, but when he sent me his copy, I did the same thing. I just wanted to listen to just his copy that he sent me and not be thinking in terms of comparison yet. I just wanted to listen to the music. I wanted to be absorbed by the music, right? And I was absolutely absorbed. I mean, it was like without thinking in terms of comparison, it immediately felt like a different experience right from the beginning and all the way to the end. And it was one of those things where, when you're listening to something, you just don't want it to end because it's just so good. It's just so, immersive that you're just like, I don't want this sound to end, right? So after listening to his version, I then did my back and forth toggling between both copies. And I think him and I came to a lot of the same conclusions. I mean, this reissue is just not good. And even though I was happy with it prior to the comparison, once I realized all the things that were absolutely missing, I mean, there's things that are just missing, right? So going back to my, comparison early, yeah, there's different driving styles that you can have, but there's absolutely a right way and a wrong way to drive a car in many instances, right? And when there's things that are missing that take away from the experience, you can't get that back, right? No matter what system you have, if there's things that aren't there and you're not hearing those things, it definitely detracts from the experience. So him and I kind of compared notes, and we had very similar reactions to the two different versions.
So Geoff, then just can you sort of extrapolate a little bit more on that?
Well,
So
I read what Nathan writes.
I know.
I can tell he's very, he's smart. He knows music. He loves music. And I read that, and I had the craft, and I'd listened to it compared to mine. I actually think my Brilliant Corners, which I love that record. I've loved it since I was a kid. I think it's different than Tom's. I'm not positive, but I'll tell you which one it is. But I just thought they kind of did this wrong. Like, it doesn't sound right. And so I reached out to Nathan. I think I asked you for his email. I've done this a couple times. Maybe it's insane, but it's like I did it when I wrote my sound story on the Hoffman group. Somebody was like going on and on about some record that I love. I can't remember what it is anymore. Some guy in Florida. And I just DM'd him, and I was like, hey, what's your address? Can I send you something? And I just wanted Nathan to hear it. And I didn't even know if I was right. Like, I figured I was right. And I had actually sent it to another friend named Geoff, not spelled the same way, who's very good, loves jazz, is in the Bay Area. I'd sent it to him, and he had said some of the same things I was thinking. And then Nathan came back with some of the same things. And I think I even sent that record to your guys, Tom. I do that sometimes. Tom will, and actually, Tom, I have a record that I disagree with Tom on that I sent to his guys. But but in general, I'll say, hey, why don't you listen to this? And they sent back the craft with like all sorts of scribbles, and they hated that record. Now, the thing about it is, if I were coming to that like a newborn baby, and I were just putting that record on my turntable, and I'd never heard it before, God, that would blow my mind. I'd be like, wow, this thing's amazing. So it's not really Nathan's fault or anyone's fault. It's just really, we're talking about reviewing things constantly with, if you were obnoxious and said, I know for sure this is the best record ever made of this record. I mean, I think you were pretty transparent, Nathan, about like, you didn't have a ton of stuff to compare it to. No. And so you're just doing the best you can, trying to figure it out. The problem is, like, if you go on, I like the Hoffman group. I go on there all the time. But like, if you go on there, if I went on there today and I was like, hey, that craft recording's really, the horns just are wrong. The one I love is my SMJ from 1973. I'd get killed, everybody would know better. And I can't send that record all over the world,
Right.
So we have Tom on, and what was do you remember your assignment, Tom?
Yeah.
Do you remember, Steve?
I'm trying to remember it. We're doing a little segment. He knows about it. It was called Port's Picks. I want you to tell the viewers your top 5, some of the best-selling top 5. That was your assignment. Then you have some more after that if we have time. But it's your turn to wow us on that. I'm curious to hear your top 5.
because I actually like my second part, I'll do my second part first, and then I'm going to go quickly through my first part. I'll do my second part very quickly, which is this. I was going to write something along the lines of, if you want to know where somebody's coming from in audio, and you want to know, you don't ask them what their stereo is, you don't ask them what their room is like and how their electricity is done and what their history with audio is. They're not going to tell you, and they just don't want to go down that road. But you can ask them about music, and that will tell you a lot about where they're coming from. So here's my questions for people. If I wanted to know something about you, if I wanted to know something about Geoff, I would ask these questions.
Okay.
What are the 5 best sounding records you've ever heard? What are your 5 favorite records of all time? What 5 famous recordings never sounded all that good to you? What 5 recordings are much better than most of your friends or audiophile compatriots might think? And if the person answered those questions, you would have to, in my world, you would have to tell me what pressing you're listening to. If you said, I love the new Rhino Cars album, I think we would be done. But if you told me that you love the original, then I would say, yes, I love that record too. I bought it in 1978 and I've played it about 5,000 times. Never gotten tired of it. Anyway, so those are my 5 those are my questions for somebody. But here's the 5 records that I would say. I tried to pick something from the rock world, something from the jazz world, something from classical, something from who knows what it is. That's actually jazz. So the Eagles' first album, the one on that white, beautiful Asylum label, that record blew my mind when I first played it. And I know it's in our top 10 best sounding records of all time. So top 5 is right in there as well. I could have picked Led Zeppelin too. I could have picked a lot of things, but I went with that because I just love the way that record sounds. And I actually do like the Eagles. And that Jackson Browne record is a very good record, but I prefer the Eagles' first album. Okay, one. Blood, Sweat, and Tears. I've written about this record for 25 years. It just blows my mind how well recorded it is, Roy Halley. And then for classical,
hang on. So it's the debut album, the self-titled.
Second album, self-titled.
Second album. Okay.
Yeah. And some people, I won't name any names, think it's kind of pop and it's kind of radio friendly and all the rest of it. But I think it's still phenomenally well.
So what?
Amazing record. Then I would go with Pictures in an Exhibition. My favorite version is with Muti on EMI, I believe. Or is it Previn? No, it's Muti. And that's just an amazing record. The reason I would pick that one is because there's so much going on. These are all records, these 5 records I would use to demo my stereo. If Geoff came over and Geoff said, well, what are some good sounding records? Can you play me something? Any of these 5 would be great. And I think I played Geoff some of these things. My Bob and Ray for sure. My Song of the Volga Boatman that I love so much. And it's 20 musicians live in a big studio, 1958, living stereo. It has some of the most dynamic sound I've ever heard in my life. It's so real sounding. Obviously, there's a fair amount of multi-miking because things show up in different places, but the space and the energy of that ensemble is just blows my mind. And finally, there's a jazz record that we consider the best sounding jazz record we have ever played. And this includes probably, 1,000 jazz records, something like that. Something else, Cannonball Adderley, Miles Davis. When you find the right pressings of that record, which by the way are not even remotely like the originals, that record is like live musicians in your house. And if you have big speakers and a dedicated room and maybe the wires are strung all over the place, and it's the kind of place that it looks like a dungeon or a tomb, and nobody should be in there because it's just so
it's not Geoff's place, and it doesn't sound like
it's not Geoff's place. See, the key to the sound room, in my opinion, the reason the sound room is what it is because you're not in there to be reading magazines and looking at your phone. You're just in there to sit in a single chair in front of 2 speakers, not talk. Nobody else is in there. They have no business being in there. It's just you and the music. And I liken that, speaking of relating that to Geoff's article, where somebody says, why would you want to go into a room and just play a record by yourself? I say, why would you want to go to a museum and just look at a painting by yourself? Well, you don't need anybody around you to help you understand that painting. You just look at the painting, and that's the experience of looking at a painting. I listen to a record. It's the experience of listening to the record. I don't want anybody else around. I don't want anybody talking. I just want to hear that record. And as Nathan said, I want it to take me from the beginning to the end and feel like I still want more. That's what a good record and a good stereo is all about. And that's the reason we're audiophiles in the first place.
Okay.
So I guess you're not going to buy the new one-step MoFi something else by Cannonball Adelaide. It just got released today, or you can order it today or something. No?
You know, for people who like that sort of thing, that's the kind of sort of thing they would like.
So you're not at all. You've never tried the one steps by MoFi or any of that stuff. There it is.
Well, we've reviewed some.
Okay. I send Tom those sometimes.
Yeah, we get them.
I want to hear what he thinks. Like I probably will send him the I'll probably send him the Beatles Red and Blue, because I'm fascinated by that whole. It's not just that those records are like, oh, this is bad sounding or this is good sounding. Like, just the idea. I just listened to him briefly. I put on the red one, and just some of those tracks are just picked apart. Like, I compared it to like unbaking the cake, and then like it's just really interesting to me. The I don't know about the ethical concept, but the idea of like saying, you know what, like, I don't think that the way they put that record together originally and where the sound is and where the instruments are, I don't think that's right. I think we've figured out a better way to do it. I think that's like, I mean, I find that fascinating, and I'll probably send that record to Tom so he can listen to it. But I'll send him, like, because I'm always curious, and I don't believe that you can know if something's going to be good or bad until you hear it. And so I'm curious. So I'll pick up new stuff, and I'll listen to it, and I'll share it with people, and I'll say, oh, this sounds way better than. I mean, Tom, I brought you the Led Zeppelin 2 from the box set that Jimmy Page did,
right?
And you actually kind of like it.
I do like it, and I also really like the other record you brought me, which was Brothers in Arms, cut by Chris Bellman. And I've never heard Chris Bellman make a good sounding record until I heard that one. And we find the CBs in the dead wax, and we go, oh, that's why it doesn't sound good. This guy did it. But then he did a great job with Dire Straits. Now, anybody can make a good sounding record. There are some people that I don't think can make a
Brothers
good
in Arms isn't a great sounding record to begin with. I mean, that's not
what
a
is
great
it?
recording. That's not a great recording, Brothers in Arms. It's probably the worst sounding Dire Straits album.
I take the opposite view of that. I used to think
Over Gold is so much better than Brothers in Arms.
Yeah, well,
Over Gold is a terrible record.
Yeah, I don't like it either. But I can tell you, I played Brothers in Arms very loud, and it was the size of Mount Everest in my room. It just would not be. It could not be controlled. It was so big, powerful, and energetic. And I said, this is the sound that we don't get on these modern records. And here it is, Chris Bellman, thank you very much. Now, it's not a perfect recording. I'm the first to say it's digital and has some shortcomings. And even his cutting isn't nearly as good as Robert Ludwig's. But it's a good record for whatever you pay, $30 or something. Most people are not going to go find an original of it and clean it up right, which is what we do.
Go ahead, Mazzy.
Mr. Westman, I got the assignment wrong because I was thinking, since you interviewed Rhino this week about reissues people were disappointed with, I picked two Warner Brothers records, which I absolutely love the sound of. I don't know what Tom thinks of these.
Yeah.
And Waiting for Columbus.
To me, no, and I'm being serious. These are two of my favorite records. I like the music and I like the sound. One is Ry Cooder's Jazz. I think it's the sound, the original pressing. It sounds fabulous. I don't know the Matrix or whatever. I love this.
I can tell you the best Matrix for that record. Go for it. I
want to see which one Mazzy has.
This is bonus material for people.
I love this.
This is worth a lot of money to some people.
Hold on.
LW1.
LW1 Mazzy. LW1 Mazzy.
Where's my fucking Matrix?
It's won every shootout for the last 10 years.
LW1. Bingo!
Yeah.
Whoa!
Now you're talking.
And the other one is side one especially. And the bass on this, Freak Folk Funky Soul record by Tim Buckley, Greetings from LA.
Oh, yeah.
The side one of that bass. I love the sound of this record. I love fucking this record. I'm like fucking this record. That came out wrong. I bought this when it came out in 72. I never took the postcard out. And I love this record. Do you like it? What do you think?
I don't like it, but other people do.
Tom,
It does have a lot of bass. I'll tell you that. I know for a fact.
It does. You know
Those
what I'm
records have
talking
a lot
about.
of bass.
You know, Get
LA
on Top of Me Woman, that bass on that song.
LA Woman by the Doors, your favorite cut of that one, Tom?
The favorite version of it?
Yes.
Of LA Woman?
That's what they're asking you.
Oh, well, there are. Yeah, it's like we don't really go out of our way to tell people stuff like that. But the original American versions, I think the original are artisan.
Columbia Santa Maria with the die cut cover always sounds really good to me. Look for CSM and the Dead Wax.
Hey, can I show you the record?
I think it was mastered at Artisan.
And so Nicole wants to know your system. Can you talk about that quickly, Tom, please?
It's complicated. It's all on my blog. If you go to my blog, you can see pictures of it, and you can read I actually do a thing about my stereo where I take it all the way from 1976 to the present, which I'm sure bores people to death. But there was a lot of changes that I went through, and I even talk about how my old stereo from the 90s, which I had been in audio for 25 years, was very dark and unrevealing compared to the one I have now. So all my opinions from 25 years ago are suspect. And I feel the same thing is going on in the world of audiophiles when you have systems that aren't very revealing and aren't tonally accurate and very musical and enjoyable the way Geoff would like, but they're not good for really knowing what your record sounds like, because your system is doing all sorts of things to it to keep the bad stuff from bothering you. And that's the opposite of what we have. All the bad stuff just jumps out of the speakers. And that's why these heavy vinyl records don't appeal to us anymore, because we hear all the bad stuff and we don't like it.
I wanted to put in a plug for Tom's, because we said better records, but I have to say, I go to his blog. It's the Skeptical Audiophile. I think when I'm in a record store, I usually do like Tom Portman blog, and it comes up. And then you can search for records. And Tom doesn't really give it away, but like there are little hints in there. Like he might say something like, you're looking at a record. I mean, I was in like rural England. I was looking at a record, and he goes, you might think the UK pressing is best for this, but don't do it. And I'm like, ooh, I put it right down. I had found it, and I was like, wow, this is $7. Well, it's probably worth that.
A good example there would be.
People still have a blog?
What's that?
People still have blogs?
Oh yes. Well, we get 1,000 clicks a day. Somebody's doing it.
I bet you.
Anyway, the Elvis Costello first album that has the slightly different cover. People say, "Oh, this is the British copy. Let's get that one." And it's by far the worst. It sounds like a cassette. It sounds like it's underwater. And you get the right American copies, and it just comes to life. And it's like, well, I guess we shouldn't just assume that Elvis Costello's British pressings, although it's true for all his other stuff, it's not true for the first album. But the first album was recorded in America, because I actually had a chiropractor one time. He was the bass player. Yeah, Cloverleaf
backup band,
Cloverfield or whatever it is. He was the bass
before Huey Lewis and the News. Those guys.
Yeah,
Patrick, I haven't heard from you lately. What are your thoughts on things right now?
What do you want to know?
He's crushed.
I'm not. How am I crushed? I'm not crushed at all. I mean, like I said, you can arm yourself. You can, like the LW1, Los Angeles W1. That means it was the first pressing in Los Angeles. I mean, if I was looking for a Warner pressing like that, that's what I would be looking for. It would be an LW1 as opposed to the JW1, because I prefer the Los Angeles pressings to the Jacksonville. There are things that you can do to educate yourself to help you in those things. That's why I was curious what the album was that Geoff was looking for in England that was not bad, UK pressing. I would say that for me, I've listened to a lot of Black Sabbath, like a lot of, I'm a metal guy. I've heard, the Philips label, Vertigo. I've heard the NIMS. I've heard the WWA. You get all, some of the WWAs are the Vertigos that just X'd it out and they just changed the matrix number. You can get original UK Black Sabbath for cheap if you don't care about the label. I personally prefer, for the first 4 albums, the UKs. Those are my favorites. It's just my preference. To me, the green label, and maybe I haven't had the right pressing, but I think it was mastered at Artisan and then cut. I've heard several of those, and they don't sound bad, but they just don't have that magic to me. And maybe that's my confirmation bias, kicking in, because I've got that nice Vertigo label swirling on on my turntable.
So will if Rhino does release, the Hi-Fi Series releases the self-titled by Black Sabbath, would you purchase it?
I would just to try, just to shoot it out for sure, or I'll have somebody send it to me to shoot it out. So Jim at Record Collector News is supposed to send me some of the stuff he has from Tom for the Zappa title. He has a couple of Zappa titles, and he was going to send me some of those, and then I would put them up against, the best U.S. whatever pressing I have here. Hot Rats would probably be the reissue or the original. But I mean, so we're supposed to do that. But I mean, those are the kind of things I like to do.
When Patrick Milligan was on my show last week for the announcement, I was sort of talking about the Black Sabbath self-titled. Now they'd be using the artisan tapes, I guess, the original artisan tapes that are here in,
well,
I guess,
that
in LA.
That was the thing we talked about. That was like, because I thought I heard him say that he could not get access to the tapes in the UK and he had to use the US tapes. But then there was other people that say no, he corrected himself. So I don't know, but I would still, regardless what it would be, I would check it out because I love Black Sabbath. And I mean, I'm always looking for the best sounding Black Sabbath. I mean, that's
he didn't say whether he can get the tapes or not. Just said he couldn't release this. He can't release stuff in the UK. UK,
exactly. It was an issue with releasing in the UK, and they want to do a worldwide release. So that's why.
Who knows if he would be able to get the tape?
I wish they do Volume 4 because there's no good sounding Volume 4 out there that I've ever heard. All of them sound horrible to me.
Well, we can send you one. They're very expensive.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're all muddy. They're muddy. I mean, to me, they're muddy. I mean, it's a recording. It's like Black Sabbath Born Again. I mean,
Patrick, you should have him. He just said he'll send you one. Have him send you one, and you listen to it. If it stinks, you just tell him.
Oh, I mean, if you want to send it to me, come back on the borrow it, I will gladly do that. I will gladly.
And you can come on the show again, and you can tell us your thoughts.
We can do a shootout between that one, the UK, the box set, and the Chris Bellman, since Chris Bellman cut Volume 4.
And you can send the file. You can send the file to Tom to listen to as well, because we do blind shootouts on the show as well through files. I mean, it's obviously not using your own equipment, but I mean that seems to be pretty effective as well, because there's definitely some differences.
I understand what Patrick does, and he does it really well, and for doing those things. But I still don't understand how to enjoy music from a file, from a needle drop. And it's not disparaging Patrick when people say on the Hoffman forums, "Listen to this one and this file and this file." Yeah, you can hear the difference between those files, but I need it in my room I need a physical thing in my room with the room.
There's an amazing, I'm sure you've seen this, but somebody took the Beach Boys, I think it was like Surf's Up or something, that era, and he just mixed all the different versions of Surf's Up that have come up over the years. And I think it was because they recently reissued the Beach Boys.
You hear all the versions. I get you. I get
early 70s stuff. They really did some weird stuff to some of those, and it was like a 10-minute long version of Sail on Sailor, and it was fascinating. You could really hear where they screwed up.
I understand the comment with my ears, but if I got, let's say there's Patrick or anyone does 5 versions, and then I get those 5 versions physically in my room, would my ears hear the same difference with those 5 versions?
You get 95% of the way there, I would say. I mean, if you have a nice DAC, if you have a nice, if you can get it, in your main system. I wouldn't say listening through a computer. No, I mean, but actually, if you can stream it onto your system, you probably get 90% of the way there, I would say.
Okay.
I tried to, I don't mean to complain about the Hoffman board, but when I went to England and I came back and
but you're going to.
It was an odd rule. When I went to England and I was on this walking trip all through Cumbria, we were having a great time, but I went to all these rural record stores and got so many records, maybe 50. I had them all in my carry-on, but I got as many as I could. And because it was like a candy store. But if I had like a Neil Young American pressing of After the Gold Rush, those people would have been drooling as well. So I went on the message board and I tried to connect with a couple people and see if we could trade or be in different countries, and I would shop for them and they would shop for me. And I posted it, and whoever the moderator was, he kept taking it down. And I was like, "What's happening here?" And he's like, "This is against the rules." I was like, "Oh, there are rules like that?" And so you can't do that because I want
you have to inbox people directly, inbox one-on-one. Yeah.
I want a record pen pal in a rural part of the England that can go and shop for me, and I'll go shop for that person.
Yeah, and I want a Moscow bride.
Patrick.
Yes.
10 years war. Good pressing. Tom, thoughts?
I've never heard it. I've never heard that.
What album are we talking?
He says, "Is the Black Sabbath 10-Year War a good pressing according to your panel?"
Oh, I
Love
don't.
it.
I don't know that.
I don't know either.
Isn't that a comp?
I don't know. It might be.
Whatever.
Yeah, it's a comp. It's a comp. Yeah, it's just a compilation.
Yeah, we wouldn't do a compilation of Black Sabbath. There are some good sounding compilations. You know, the Best of Bread is a great sounding record, and there's lots of other. Best of Traffic is a great sounding record. Earth, Wind, and Fire, Best of, is a great sounding record. But as a general rule, they sound. That's a good one.
This is a good. We sold this at my first record store job, 1973. It wasn't one of their lost leaders. It was sold in stores. It's 4 records, and I was playing it especially like Doobie Brothers, listen to music and stuff, and Black Sabbath. This is a friggin'. It's a cheap ass comp, and it sounds really good. I don't know how they did it because I know comps are. You never know. Jock Holtzman curated this from Elektra, but it's actually good. I'm just giving Warner Brothers suggestions for their audiophile.
Well, Rhino wants suggestions, right? I mean, that's when I talked to Mr. Milligan. So
I don't think
they better cover Rhino, but
I wish people would put out records that just aren't out. I mean,
yes,
you know, I have to say, there are so many records that I've paid like $100 for because they just don't exist in any other form than I've said before. Teddy Edwards, Good Gravy. I love that record. And it just only exists in like 1961, and it's really expensive. And why isn't there a $40 alternative of that record? Maybe it's not going to be. I don't know what the details are of that. But there are other ones that they just don't exist. I don't know why the same things are coming out all the time, but maybe because they sell well. I mean, that Cars record sold out, right?
Yeah, it's out.
But if I could,
it's like going for like $100, right?
Go ahead, Tom. Yeah, $100.
I was going to say. I was selling audiophile records and collecting audiophile records in the 70s. And every time something in the audiophile world came along, a gold CD or an SACD or a new way of making a record, Heart's Dreamboat Annie got remade. So there must be 20 audiophile versions of it in one way or another. And that's because everybody wants a great sounding Heart's Dreamboat Annie and will keep buying it. And the labels know that. So they, Asia. How many versions of Asia have come along in the last 25 or 30 years? An awful lot. And
on vinyl, not that many.
Well, anything that's related to audiophile. So there's
the Cisco, which was not good.
The Cisco was terrible, but other Doors would be a good example. Bernie took the digital tapes and made that box set, and then
the black one, that was bad. That
was pretty terrible. In fact, the record in there to play is Soft Parade, which is my favorite Doors album. You play that record and you have to leave the room. It sounds so terrible. But for some reason or another, that's what they did. And then they came along and did them in analog. And then they came along and did them as double 45s. And they keep redoing them because people will keep buying the Doors albums. That doesn't appeal to me, but apparently audiophiles like buying the same records over and over again.
And Bernie's over 80, right? Bernie Grumman's like well over 80 years old, correct?
He's pretty old.
Okay.
And he made that Monk record, and I believe, isn't that Bernie Grumman mastering that?
Yeah, the craft is a Grumman cut. That's correct.
Well, the funny thing is they acknowledge that they rolled off the top on Pretzel Logic, and I'm thinking, how much more can you roll off, considering you probably can't even hear the upper frequencies anyway at 80 plus years of age.
Since you berated sort of 2 mastering engineers, Tom, if you can answer or not answer, are there any modern mastering engineers you like? Their work, not personally, their work that you.
Well, that once Chris Bellman made that Good Sounding Brothers in Arms, my opinion changed completely. It's like, he can cut a good record. This is a bit of a shock to most people, but there actually is a heavy vinyl 180 gram record, which we've talked about on our blog, which is the best sounding version of that album we've ever played. It's a jazz record. It's an OJC. It doesn't even have a mastering engineer named. And that's my favorite part about that whole story is because all the famous guys
from the OJC from the 80s.
No, OJC from the modern era, 180
one
gram.
Of the new OJCs.
Yes.
Tom, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on the ERC stuff as well? Just so
I can't even believe that there's such a company. It's just astonishing to me how incompetent. And what a bad idea it is. You know, anybody who's ever heard a master tape goes, well, we need this and that and the other thing to fix it. And I'm sure everybody here knows mastering engineers and talked to them. And we had to take out 8 dB at 50 cycles because the tape was just so bass heavy. Oh, this guy just threads up the tape and runs it through some old tube equipment and charges you a lot of money for it. And to me, if there was a bigger snake oil salesman in the history of the world of audio, I can't imagine who it would be. People accuse us of being snake oil salesmen, but our records sound good and his don't.
And they wrap it in that fancy tissue paper to make you feel special too. You forgot about that part.
Well, I have one ERC. I have one ERC, and that's Forever Changes, and that's the stereo version. And that, except for the second song, which has tape dropouts, and you could tell they actually didn't do anything to it because it sounds horrible. But other than that, it sounds really good to me, and I love that record. But that's the only one that I have, and that's, I won't buy any more. But I mean, that was the only one that I've ever bought.
And I do apologize, Tom. I interrupted you about your OJC story, but you were saying that it's 180 gram. You're not sure
what
the
is
mastering
that record,
engineer.
Tom?
What
is that record?
We're not telling.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Here's what we're going to do. Here, let me just tell you. I'll give you 1 minute.
They haven't issued many OJCs yet, so
there's scores of them.
I mean, of the new, you're talking about the modern.
Yeah,
I don't think he's talking about the brand new thing.
Yeah,
I'm talking about the stuff from after 2000. Concord took over OJC. They started making these records.
Well, there's a new series in the last.
Yeah, all the Art Pepper stuff we played. All the Bill Evans stuff. We played all those, and we were always unimpressed or slightly impressed with their output. That we thought, well, they're nice records, but they tend to be a little opaque and a little closed in, and they don't have a lot of presence, and they don't really have the energy. But they're not bad records. They're kind of what you would make if you wanted a record that anybody could play and enjoy, which is fine. And they're $20 or $25. That's all well and good. But we'd never heard one that actually could win a shootout until we did the shootout and discovered that when we read the stamper numbers, these are the stampers for one that's currently in print. Now, here's what's interesting about all that. There was one copy that had the best side 1. There was a different copy that had the best side 2. And there was another, we gave it 3 pluses. And there was another copy. No, there was a couple other copies that both got 2 pluses. So it came in second place, or we give it a B, let's say. So imagine you're going to test whether all the OJCs currently in print, made the way they're made cheaply, not these special versions of them, you're going to test that. So you're going to get 20, you're going to do, say, 10 titles. Well, you're going to need 5, 6, 7 copies of every one in order to know whether one can really win a shootout. That's 75 records, and cleaning them and listening to them. That's tens of thousands of dollars in labor to find that one hidden gem. And it's not practical to be doing business that way. There might be some amazing sounding new OJCs that were made after 2000. But my God, how much work will it take to actually find another one? We lucked into this one. But lucking into another one is not on the menu. It's not luck. You would have to actually expend a great deal of money, and you might come up empty-handed. That's the background to this idea.
Here's a good sounding record right here. This one, this is a new reissue, Selling England by the Pound. This one, the Atlantic 75. I've had many versions of this. This is a good sounding record. So I'll show one record, and that's the one I'm going to show.
Well, we're gonna leave it at that. That's we went over time. We normally do an hour here, but I was reading the MIT review the other day, and check this out. There's deep fake of Chinese influencers are live streaming 24/7. So if you have $1,000, you can get basically a Mazzy AI that will go live stream all day talking about records. You could have your channel Mazzy 24/7 with you. Not even
wouldn't want that.
Don't give him any ideas. Don't give him any ideas.
So you get someone like Geoff to write a nice script. You pay Geoff to write a nice script, or Nathan to write a script, or Tom to write a script, and then the AI will then make the movements of Mazzy with all of his videos, and he can go 24/7 for $1,000.
They should deep fake Mazzy his picture on the cover of this instead of the serial killer Ed Kemper that they decided to use.
The eagle with soul.
Yeah. I think that will happen. So, I mean, all of us YouTubers that do record reviews, we could be 24/7 AI'd. You can talk about anything you want.
But somebody has
definitely
to
not
watch
enough.
them.
Well, they will, because it will, like they're watching this article here is interesting because they're doing it to sell products 24/7 on these different Chinese live stream websites. These AIs are selling products, and they basically, it's a script that's written. It's then punched into the computer. The AI then interprets that script, and then the AI figure spits out the information. It's constant. And so it's gone from taking, I think, a couple of years ago, a few hours for the software to figure things out, to now you can just put in a script, and they know within a minute how to basically put it out.
You know what, Geoff? I know we're closing down, and Geoff a little bit talked about the Beatles. We shouldn't get into that, but the Red Blue. But I do take issue with a video that talked about this Beatle remix being AI. Ain't fucking AI. It's a software that extracts the vocals and the piano, and that's it. It's not creating a phony Lennon or a phony Beatles. And I took issue with someone who did a video about that and really kind of insinuated that these remixes are AI, and they're not
AI. The only AI you're seeing is on that video of Now and Then, where you see John Lennon, complete AI, basically conducting an orchestra. That's an AI.
Well, the video
version.
stuff is another issue.
But that's AI. The music itself is not AI at all. Anyways, we're leaving it at that, gentlemen. This has been awesome. Appreciate your time. We're all coming back for. I think we'll need an encore at this point. I think they want to hear more from us at some point with this panel, I would hope.
Have a great week.
Or they want us to never want to see us again. One of the
get off. Yeah, it'll be like, get off. We don't hear you again. Okay, guys, have a good weekend.
You guys are done.
Lovely to see you all. Good day.
All right. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye. I don't even know how to stop mine.
It can never stop, Tom.
What's that?
It never stops.
It never stops. It just keeps going.
Like an Albert Brooks movie. There we go. See? All right. I'll see you later, buddy. Okay.
All right, man. Good talking to you.
Yeah.
There's some buttons and there's some stuff.